Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the On Track, Off Track podcast. I'm Jared Colow,
And I'm Victor Oporto-Gola.
and this week we have some really exciting topics to cover. Most importantly, Hamilton back on the top step of an F1 podium after 2.5 years without a victory. We're going to be covering the best Hamilton victories of all time in our draft segment. And then in Off Track, we're going to be talking about some insane records with Koenigsegg and also a little bit about the engine options for the Koenigsegg Gemera. So first off, we are going to jump right in with our on-track section and talk about this Lewis Hamilton victory. Give me your reactions, Victor.
Yeah, it's great to see. I was so excited. I was on the edge of my seat for, most of that race. I admittedly have not been a Lewis fan throughout history. That's because, though, I am usually a fan of the underdog. If someone's winning too much, I don't like to see that, right? I like to see different winners. I like to see a mix up of different winners, different leaders, right? So, and Lewis Hamilton, I mean, he's has 7 championships. He's won quite a bit throughout the 2010s, let's say. But now he's the underdog. You don't expect him to win. I didn't expect him to have a win this season, especially after last season, Max Verstappen dominating, right? More so than Lewis ever did. And this is a back-to-back Mercedes victory. Russell won last time, and now it's Hamilton, right? And this win was purely based on merit, right? So it was great to see Lewis Hamilton win a race after a couple of years, since 2021, I believe, at his home GP, the last British GP he's going to have with Mercedes, and he's moving to Ferrari, which makes me like him even more. I'm more of a fan nowadays. But yeah, it was a great race. There's a bunch of different leaders throughout the race, whether it was George Russell in the beginning and then getting knocked out, and then it was Lando Norris, and it was Hamilton, and it was a great race. It was fun, exciting. The strategies were cool. They were completely different. Some people lost out, got into the intermediates too early, but Lewis Hamilton made it work. At the end, it was 4 or 5 laps where Verstappen passed Lando and he was catching Hamilton, and it was really exciting. And you just saw how much the win meant to Hamilton at the end. He was crying, he had tears, he was breaking up when he was talking over the radio and the post race interview, and it was really cool. But what did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, everything you said is totally true. It was an extraordinary race, really from beginning to end. As you mentioned, it started with Russell and Hamilton on the front row, but Russell got a really good start away. Hamilton fell back a little bit during the early stages while all the drivers were trying to preserve their tires and figure out what they were going to do with the potential of rain coming in the near future. But Hamilton proved why, when you give him an opportunity, he's going to be able to capitalize on it. Like you, there have been times when I haven't rooted for Hamilton. And for example, in 2021, when he was racing with Max, I wanted to see the underdog win. I wanted to see the new champion, so I was rooting for Max in that championship. But it's uncontested that Hamilton is going down as one of the greatest drivers of all time, with 104 race victories now, still getting victories late into his career, 39 years old now, going to be 40 in January. He's set a plethora of records during this race. He won 9 times now at the British GP, which is the most of any driver at any single track in F1 history. He's the oldest driver in the 21st century to win a race. He obviously won this one not from a dominant position, but from a car that looks like it's most likely the third fastest car on the grid, but was able to pull it out in front of the home fans. The Mercedes factory is very close to Silverstone. So while it's a German company, it's really a British F1 team. Um, you just couldn't write a better storybook ending for it. And it's actually so funny. We were looking back in our messages from yesterday after qualifying, and Russell had qualified on pole, Hamilton in second, and Victor had texted me, "Oh, how great would it be to see Hamilton nick the win off of his teammate?" And I responded, "Yeah, I mean, British GP win for Hamilton would be a legendary way to cap off his Mercedes career." And that's exactly what happened. We got to see the absolute legend that I'm sure we're going to get to relive in Drive to Survive in a full episode later on this year. Um, let's just talk through some of the specifics of the race. So the first stint is where Russell got out in the lead, Hamilton P2. You had Max, who was able to get past Norris for P3 around the outside of turn 4, right at the beginning of the race. In the back, there was a little bit of contact, but mostly everyone stayed around where they were. Leclerc went up 3 spots. There was Albon dropping back a little bit. But really, the whole first stint was about managing tires and wondering when the rain was going to come and how quickly people were going to put on the inters or the wet weather tires, depending on how strong the rain came in. And the first teams to do that were Ferrari and Perez, who went on to the intermediate tires first, and then had to come off of those tires and lost a ton of time and pretty much ended the chances for both of them of doing anything in the race. What was your reaction to that particular moment in the race and that first stage when there was a lot of preservation and it wasn't necessarily looking like there was going to be a ton of battles, at least in the early stages?
Yeah, like you said, it was all about tire management and strategy calls, right? So a lot of the teams were asking the drivers what they thought that they should do based on the track conditions, right? And it was really weird weather. It was, kind of wet, kind of dry. It was moist. It was, there was drops of rain, but it wasn't like raining like crazy. It was really it was intermediate weather, let's say, not for intermediate tires, but intermediate weather. You don't know whether it was going to rain or not at a certain point, and every team on the radio message had different timing on whether it was going to rain or not, right? So, and the biggest loser definitely was Leclerc in that situation, right? So he was up to he was up think 3 places up until like eighth, just behind
Mm-hmm.
Sainz, say, and him and Perez went on the intermediates. Perez was way back. It didn't even matter what he did, at that point. His race wasn't there, but Leclerc lost out big time. He decided to come in and change for the intermediates before everyone else, and he burnt them out way before it was needed. There was a couple drops when they went in, but it was way too dry still. And he lost out. He didn't get points at the end, and that's clearly just because of that decision. And then you look at some of the top runners, and they decided to stay out on their mediums and see what they could do. Some of them were sliding around a little bit, but they managed to make it work. And clearly, the winners were the ones who decided to stay out on the slicks and go into the intermediates when it was really time to change. And the first stint was it was the first lap that was really exciting, seeing Verstappen pass on the outside on a couple times. Albon got some damage, pushed him back a bit. Hulkenberg started in P6. He dropped down a little bit, but also ended his race really well. And shout out to him. That's something that you don't see too often with the Haas's. So it was really interesting to see. I was rooting for the Williams, both Sargent and Albon, to see whether they can get points, and at the end, Albon did. But Sargent was close, which is not something you say too often in these races, right? So it was really interesting to see in the beginning. The middle of the race was kind of slow, but near the end it got really exciting again. So in the beginning, it was all about track conditions and where you started and what you thought the strategy will be, right? It was also interesting to see the McLarens battle it out in the beginning as well. And so it was exciting. Let's say you didn't know what was going to happen, and then once we saw George Russell having to come in, it was odd because there was no radio communication before about any issues or something happening, and then all of a sudden he pulls in, and the pole sitter ended up retiring, right? So it was anybody's game at that point. What did
Yeah.
you think about the strategy calls that happened?
Yeah, well, before I talk about the strategy, I do want to just take it back a little bit as well, about the excitement that happened right around when the rain started, and that really is what really led to the ultimate strategy calls that we would be looking at, and the different decisions that the drivers and the teams were going to have to make. Because right around like lap 14 and 15, that's when you started getting speckles of rain on the track and a little bit of mixed conditions. As you mentioned, intermediate conditions, but not quite intermediate tires. This is when it got started getting a little bit stronger, and that's when you had some really, really exciting passing. You had Norris, who was able to pick up a tire advantage on Max, pass him back on the hanger straight for that third place position. You had you had Hamilton take the lead on lap 18 from Russell in the DRS. You had both of the Mercedes go off at one point, and then Norris was able to get past Russell and then eventually get past Hamilton. Piastri was able to get past Hamilton. And then all of a sudden you went from a Mercedes 1-2 to a McLaren 1-2 with Max pushing up. Of course, that's when you mentioned that Russell backed out of the race with a gearbox issue. I think they started by saying it was a gearbox issue, and then they said it was the water cooling system of the car.
Ironic.
Yeah, exactly. So he ended up out of the race. And then it really looked for a while like it was going to be a McLaren win. I mean, you had Norris in front, you had Piastri in second, you had the other drivers all a little bit back from them, probably like 4 or 5 seconds. I mean, no one was that far away from each other this whole race, and that's what kept it exciting. Um, but yeah, you had both of the McLaren drivers really up in the front. Um, and then near the end of the race, near the end of the inter period, when it came to make the decision to come off of the inters, that's when the really pivotal decisions were made. And that's when McLaren made a few bad calls that really derailed their race in a couple different ways. Of course, initially going on to the inters, they had made that mistake leaving Piastri out for a second lap instead of double stacking. Double stacking might have lost Piastri 2 or 3 seconds and maybe one position, but instead, by leaving him out a lap, he lost 4 or 5 positions and probably 20, 30 seconds, which really ruined his chances at a victory or at least a podium in this race. And then once again with McLaren, when they were trying to pull Norris off of the inters, they left him out for a lap too long, a lap longer than Mercedes and Red Bull did, which ultimately made him lose the lead to Hamilton on the exit of the pit lane, which is the point where Hamilton took the lead and kept the lead for the rest of the race. And at the same time, they put Norris on the soft tires when they were one of the teams that had a medium tire left, which was the preferred tire by all the teams. So there were really three big strategic blunders by McLaren. Norris took responsibility for the loss personally. I don't know if I would put it all on him. He made some of those strategic decisions, but at the end of the day, the team should know better than some of that. I think they also got duped out by some radio messages. There was like 2 radio messages, both with the Mercedes and the Red Bull team, where the drivers said, "Oh no, it's too early for us to come in for slicks," and then they came in for slicks that lap.
Yeah.
So I think maybe McLaren was thinking about coming in for slicks, and they thought, "Oh, if the other teams aren't doing it, then we won't," and then they ended up getting caught out. So I think it exposed the fact that McLaren is not quite used to the fact that they're fighting for a race win every weekend. They're not quite used to these little strategic chess piece moves that teams like Red Bull and Mercedes have learned and adapted to utilize in their races. over the many, many years of domination, first of Lewis Hamilton domination, and then the recent Max Verstappen domination. Um, Max put on a great show, started from fifth, finished in second. Obviously, pushing really hard on those hard tires, which were the better tires at the end, to catch up to Hamilton. And Hamilton preserved those soft tires in a way that a lot of other drivers wouldn't be able to do. I think if there's couple other drivers in the field in that position, Max is taking the win at this race again. Um, it was just a race where the drivers really got to show their stuff. You got to see the skill level of the top drivers in the sport. And I'm going to make a blanket statement here about F1, and I just think F1 is back. People were going away from watching F1 because of the Max Verstappen dominance that we've had. But anybody who's been watching this year, I challenge you to tell me it's been a boring season with 6 different race winners. I went back and did a little bit of research about the number of victors, different race winners in previous years. And 6 is the most race winners we've had since 2021, where there were 6 race victors across the whole entire season. We're already at 6 before the summer break, so we've got a lot of time left for potentially some other race winners. And then if you look beyond that, there were 2 years, I believe it was in the early 2000s, 2012 and 2008, I think, where there were 7 race winners. And then in 2000, or maybe it was in 2012, where there was 8 race winners. Either way, there were 2 years in the last 20 where there was 7 race winners in a season, 1 with 8. And then for more than that, you have to go back to F1 of the 70s and the 80s, where it was much more unpredictable, and the cars, there was a lot less parity in the championship on a race-to-race basis. So on paper and in practice, we're watching one of the more exciting, more competitive seasons in F1 history. Obviously, Max is still controlling the Drivers' Championship, and we want to see a close battle for the Drivers' Championship. But from a race-to-race basis, it's really almost impossible to complain about this season, and I really hope people aren't there complaining about this season because it's been great. It's just been amazing.
Yeah, what a turnaround from last season, where it was a max domination and one other winner, which was Sainz, when on this one circuit where Red Bull doesn't do well. So this season is very exciting, and I didn't expect that coming into the start of the season that we would see this. So it was good. I do want to touch on a couple of things though. One is the strategy call by McLaren. Like you said, McLaren should have known better at that point about which tires to put on. But it was ultimately a driver's decision, right? They asked Lando whether he should be on the medium or the soft at the end, and he said the soft. He made that call. And, even though it was technically the wrong decision in hindsight, I do believe that the team should let the driver make that decision at the end, because they're the ones pushing the car. They're the ones on track. They know the conditions a little bit better. They're not sitting on the sidelines. They're the ones in the field pretty much, right? So, and if you take that away from them, and then the team makes a bad decision, then it falls on the team and not on the driver. And I think that F1 should be team decisions before the race, and then there's going to be strategists that make calls or whatever. But ultimately, I like seeing the drivers make those decisions, right? It makes it more about the driver and less about the people in the background. And as a fan, that's what I like to see, right? It makes it more personable, where you can see the face of the person making the decision, and not a committee behind the scenes, right? The mystery, right? You actually know who it is, right? And it makes it more interesting to me. And and I'm glad to see that Lando Norris took the responsibility of making that decision at the end, right? Piastri decided to go on the medium, and he ended up doing pretty well. I mean, and that's recovering from the pit stop earlier, right? So he did pretty well. And the last thing I want to touch on is qualifying, because qualifying did have some crazy moments that ended up making a huge difference in the race, right? First thing is Perez, sliding out and hitting the wall in Q1 and ended up being 19th, right? So that is an embarrassment. Like, you texted me to be honest when it happened, and it is an embarrassment. You see Max, ending up second place, and then Perez starting out 19th or whatever. And even Verstappen made a mistake, right? Like, he ended up in the gravel pits at the same place where Perez did, but he recovered. Even though he had, a damaged car, he still ended up qualifying P4th, I want to say.
P5.
P5, right? So when you look at that, that's a huge gap in driver skill. That's literally, they went off in the same place. They might have had the same type of accident, but Verstappen managed to keep it pretty much together, and he had damage and still ended up in the top five, right? Like, that just shows the driver skill gap between them. And Red Bull must be just, I really don't know how they're sleeping by making their decision to renew him. And even if they kick him out by the end of the season, they're going to have to pay him a hell of a lot. It's still a loss on Red Bull either way, right?
Yeah.
And also, seeing George Russell getting pole after winning Austria, carrying that momentum, it does make that exciting. And ultimately, he had some issues with this car. It wasn't his fault entirely that he had to get out. But at the same time, Lewis Hamilton started P2, right? And he ended up winning the race. So it shows that qualifying really does end up making like huge decisions for the race.
Hmm. Absolutely. There were some other interesting points about qualifying as well. Some of the stuff in my notes was that Norris almost didn't have any opportunity to fight in this race because McLaren didn't put him out for a last lap in Q1 when the track was drying up, and he ended up like 14th place out of in Q1, almost didn't make it out. So yeah, out in Q1 because of Perez's spin was both the Alpines, Perez, K-Mag, and Bottas. The Williams were both looking really strong in qualifying. That's obviously what put them in the position to be battling near the edge of the points for most of this race, and what allowed Albon to ultimately take the P9 and take home 2 points, which is obviously a lot for a team like Williams, which has admittedly taken a step back, it seems, this year. Um, and then, yeah, Hulkenberg was having an amazing qualifying session and had an amazing race. Finished P6 in the race, which you have to say is one of those amazing results for the Haas team. Something that Haas is going to be partying like a victory. It's the second time he's gotten sixth place for the Haas team. He was consistently in the top 5 in qualifying for most of the session. So it was really just an outstanding race. Alonso was looking really strong during qualifying as well, right until the end when he ultimately ended up P10 because I think he got caught up in some traffic and some other stuff, but he was looking really strong as well. So excitement in qualifying, excitement in the race. The best way to cap off this exciting triple header that we've had for F1, and now we get a weekend off to a weekend or two off to sit back and relax and take in all this amazing stuff we've had, whether it's Lando's first victory or Hamilton getting another victory, George's second victory. So much to talk about. It's been quite a season.
Yeah, it's been great. I love it. It makes it so exciting, especially after last season. Now you're sitting here and you're like, what's gonna happen? Who's gonna win? It's not. It could be not Max, right? Like, and it's a real possibility somebody else will win. Clearly, right? So it's
Yeah,
been great.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so getting back to the man of the hour, Lewis Hamilton, as we mentioned, 104 race victories across his career with McLaren and Mercedes. He's going to be moving to Ferrari next year, and I'm certain that if Ferrari can maintain at least a little bit of the form that they've had in these last few years, that there will be more Hamilton victories to come, wearing the scarlet red of Ferrari. But right now, we're going to do a little bit of a look back in time at some of the most iconic Lewis Hamilton moments in our draft section.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this time I go first. Do I not?
Yes, absolutely. So we are going to be talking about the most iconic Lewis Hamilton wins. And hit us with your first pick, Victor.
So my first pick is gonna be his first one, Canada 2007. It's my home race, and it's always good to see people win in Canada, right? I love that race. So it was Canada 2007 Montreal, right? It was his first pole and his first win. And then when you look back at it, it's still a wild race. There was the infamous Kubica crash that just looked gnarly. Like, I'm surprised he didn't get more hurt than he did. The whole car was destroyed. Red flag. And the theme of actually my choices are going to be, they're almost all wet races. This was a wet race as well. And it just shows the greats. Any world champion that's up with the greats, they're all great in the rain. And the rain makes a great equalizer because it's not about the power at that point. It's not necessarily about the aerodynamics. It's about your car control. And his first win was a preview of what's to come for him. He's great in the rain, as we saw today as well. So that's my first pick.
Yeah, super historic pick. Obviously, the first of what would ultimately be the most race victories. First black driver ever to win in Formula One, so he made history on multiple fronts. There was, restarts that he had to manage, battles with his teammate Fernando Alonso, who at the time was probably the best driver in the world. Great pick. So for my first pick, I'm going to be talking about a race that is pretty much universally recognized as one of the best Hamilton performances of all time. And it's going to be at the British Grand Prix in 2008.
Yeah.
This is a race that is at the top of almost every single list or video that you'll watch talking about the most iconic Hamilton wins. It's a race where there was absolutely torrential rain. It started with inter-tire rain, and most of the drivers were on the inter-tires. But as the rain got heavier and heavier, all the drivers went and put on the full wet tires, except for Hamilton. So he
Yeah.
saved the pit stop there, was a little bit slower for a couple laps when the full wets were stronger, but ultimately was able to keep it on the track while lots of the greatest drivers of the time were spinning off or having to drive slowly. He was on the inters, they were on the wets. He kept the inters alive, kept them on the track, and then ultimately the race came back to him with the inter tires. All the other drivers had to switch back onto the inters, so he then saved 2 pit stops worth of time. And it's noted in this race that at one point the team had went on the radio and asked him to slow down because he was driving so fast and they were worried he was going to make a mistake with this huge advantage that he already had. And he responded that he would lose his focus if he wasn't going full out the whole race. So he kept his pace up, and he ended up lapping every car in the field except for 4 cars and finishing with over a minute gap to P2. At the time, it was the largest gap in a race victory in 30 years in Formula One. And as you mentioned, a masterclass of wet weather driving.
Yeah, that's a legendary race. That was also on my list here. When you look back at it, he started P4 and immediately overtook Webber and Kimi to get to P2. And that was just, like you said, a masterclass of what was to come. That's a great pick. I like that one as well. So my second one will be the race in same season, 2008, in Monaco. That race, when you look back at it, is also just like, how did he do it? he was 16 seconds behind Massa at one point. Felipe Massa makes a mistake, and Lewis Hamilton just relentless, keeps on him, and ends up passing him and winning the race. It was, and Monaco is not an easy place to make up time or pass anyone, right? It's walls on every side. It's slow. It's not a track where you see too many passes, and he ended up making it work and winning, right? So it was also a wet race, right? So when you look back, you're just like, how could you do that?
Yeah.
Yes, you can argue there might be an era of cars where the cars are smaller and easier to overtake, but it's Monaco in the
Yeah.
wet. Like, you don't do that, right? So that's my second pick.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention that on lap 6 of that race, he had put the car in the wall and had to drive it back to the pits on 3 tires, and did half the lap on 3 tires, which put him back, already to start. So yeah, absolutely legendary race. It's one of those iconic Monaco wins where that race was really one of the most exciting ones at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so for my second pick, I'm going to go back to 2014 Bahrain.
Mm.
In 2014 in Bahrain, he was battling with his teammate Nico Rosberg for the championship. And this was one of those early races that really, so to speak, at least starts the storyline of their friendship going from a friendship to a heavy rivalry. There was intense wheel to wheel battling all race long. Nico is diving up the inside. Hamilton was diving up the inside. They were doing switchbacks, passing around the outside in corners that you wouldn't expect. This is one of those races where it was less about the raw speed of the driver and more about the finesse in battling and the ability to fight and push your opponent to the limit and push yourself to the limit in these wheel to wheel situations to take the victory. Ultimately, a Mercedes won too, but only by a couple of seconds. So it was a straight up battle the entire race that Hamilton was able to prevail and ultimately win the championship that season as well.
Yeah, in retrospect, it was also a great example of, like you said, the wheel to wheel racing. When you look at what happened with Verstappen and Norris, in Austria, right? So that's how you do it. If you look back,
Mm-hmm.
that race, half the time they were side by side battling out and they never crashed, right? So it's great to see. And also, side note, Checo had a podium there. When you look at it,
Yes.
it's hard to imagine that happening. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
he had the podium in not in a car that was nearly as good as the car he's in now too. That was back in the days when Checo was a driver we all thought was going to be one of the greats.
Yeah,
Yeah, very sad.
yeah.
Anyways,
Good race though. I like that one. So my third pick will be actually Turkey 2020. So that race, I mean, it's sad that we don't race in Turkey anymore because I think it's a great track to begin with. But so it's another race where Lewis Hamilton only had one pit stop while everyone else had two or more. He decided to stay out on the inters, and he made it work. Right? It, time and time again, Lewis Hamilton has shown that he can make tires last longer than most other drivers. Right? And whether his teammate can or can't either, it's not up to the car; it's up to the driver at that point. Right? So that was a race where it showed that that could happen. There was a lot of action on the track. A lot of people spun, had accidents. Verstappen spun in spectacular fashion. And, Lewis Hamilton, again, relentless, just was there to pick up the pieces when everyone else was, having mistakes and accidents. And he ended up winning, right? So it was, it was a great race just to show that Hamilton can be there when it counts. He always sets himself up to be in the best position possible. And it once you see other people making mistakes, it's easy to make a mistake yourself because you can make excuses. Oh, everyone else is doing that. Everyone else is making mistakes. It's the track, it's the car, whatever. But he's there and he won, right? So I thought it was an exciting race, and I remember it just because it was the time where I was really into F1 during the pandemic, and it was great. I think it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I am going to pick a race now from the contentious 2021 championship between him and Max. And I think this at the time was such a hard race to watch because I was rooting for Max in this championship, and this was right at the end. And I'm talking about Brazil 2021.
Yes.
Now, in Brazil, he had been disqualified or penalized because of a DRS infraction. His DRS wing opened, I believe, 20 millimeters more than was regulation. So he was sent to the back of the grid for sprint qualifying. This is, of course, at the time when the sprint race result dictated the qualifying for the next day's race. So he starts in P20 for the sprint race and is able to fight his way with that rocket ship of a 2021 Mercedes all the way up to fifth place, then takes a new engine between the sprint race and the Grand Prix, so gets another 5 place grid penalty to start the Grand Prix in 10th place, and then passes all 10 drivers for the victory at Sao Paulo. Um, I mean, that was just one of those races where you just watched and you thought, God, this is an inevitability. No matter where he starts, that Mercedes is so powerful. The engine, that was the Mercedes rocket engines where they were just throwing in engines and taking penalties because they knew they would make up the places. And it was that victory that allowed him to be in a position to push the championship all the way to Abu Dhabi, where we got the, of course, thrilling last lap events that ultimately decided Max's first championship. But without that race victory, without that legendary performance, then Max would have had a much easier time, and there would have been a lot less excitement and controversy in the F1 world. So that was a race that I just couldn't believe when I watched it, and I think it'll go down in history.
Yeah, and especially because it was Brazil, right?
Yeah.
Hamilton has a great history in Brazil, and he loves it. They love him over there, and it was great to see. That season was amazing. It's probably the best season I can remember. So for my last pick, I will actually pick this race, the 2024 British GP. It's his comeback. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it it was a race where he fought tooth and nail. He didn't let it go. He saw the victory, in the distant light, and he held on to it. Um, nobody thought he's gonna win. I didn't think he was gonna win in the beginning of this. Okay, yeah, he might have started P2, but when you start looking at how many people passed, how many people were in the lead, all the different calls, it was chaos in the strategy department, let's say. But he made it work. And just how much it meant to him, and it's gonna be his, like I said, his last home GP with a team that he's been with since who knows, it's like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together really well, right? Like you can't separate the two in your mind until next year when you see him in red. But up until then, even when he was in McLaren, it was still pretty much Mercedes to that point, right? So he's been with the team for his whole career, and it's great to see him winning, like I said, at his home GP for the last year at the team, and his comeback after what, three? This is third season without a win.
Yeah, 2.5 years. His last victory, Saudi Arabia 2021, during that championship fight
Yeah,
with Max.
and when was the last time we've seen him so emotional like that, right? Like anytime you see a driver win and get that emotional, you know that it really means something to them. It's not just like a driver who dominates the season is just another, you know, check mark off their list. But if you don't win for that long and you're used to winning and you don't think that you can do it, and then you do, it's something that it brings joy, and also like ambition, right? You can see the ambition in these guys, right? He's almost 40, and in order to win any race, you have to be in peak physical condition, and right, you gotta have the mentality to be like, all right, I can do this. And if you just keep losing for years, it's not it's not easy. It's not easy to keep that mentality, and it's a great way to see how these guys think because they're the pinnacle of motorsports, right? So, and he's the second oldest, other than Alonso, I'm pretty sure, right? So it's great to see. I think they said it was what 16 years since his first victory, or 17
Yeah.
years. So, I mean, that's crazy, right? Like his first win was a teenage person year, like in age, right? Like it's that
Hmm.
long ago, and I loved it. I thought it was one of his better wins throughout his career.
Yeah. Yeah, it's undoubtedly going to be one of the most iconic because of all the imagery, whether it's, you know, the British Grand Prix, that it's the home GP for the team, that it's the last home GP with the team before his changeover to the rival Ferrari team. Uh, just like you said, it is going to go down in history as one of the most iconic Hamilton wins.
Yeah.
Um, for my last pick, ironically, I'm going to choose something from a time when he was battling with the team that's going to be his future team next year. And it's going to be Germany 2018 when F1 still raced at the Nürburgring GP circuit. That is a racetrack that I have always loved, and I really still don't understand why it's not on the track. There's no German races on the track right now, and there's just this amazing German GP circuit at the Nürburgring that they could be racing at. But that race was particularly exciting because he was locked into a championship battle with Vettel at the time. Obviously, later in the season, the Ferraris fell off and Mercedes was able to really dominate the rest. But at least at that point, it was still a tight battle. And Hamilton started P14 in that race,
Yeah.
another wet race, and made a series of passes throughout the race, daring overtakes into the tight chicanes of the Nürburgring GP circuit, which is one of my favorite parts of that track is the tight chicanes and some of the really tight corners that the drivers have to maneuver. Was able to work his way up to the top. And then Vettel went off into the wall, had to retire from the race. And from there, Hamilton managed it and brought himself, from an unlikely P14 to victory to really start the drive towards that domination and ultimately secure the victory in the championship in that 2018 season. So that's going to be my last pick.
Yeah, and in that race, there was also a ridiculous moment where he's so close to being in the pits, right? Like almost to the point of no return, and they tell him to stay out, and he narrowly misses the pit entrance wall, essentially.
Yep,
And
cuts right over the grass.
yeah, it was a ridiculous moment in the race. But yeah, that was iconic, and that track is iconic. When I do it on the sim, I hate the first corner. That first corner is awful, but the rest of the track is amazing. And yeah, it is sad that nobody races there anymore, and it's in the history books, and it's great to see people racing really hard over there. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think we could have chosen many different races. Like you said, there's 104 wins to in his career, and starting from 2007, right? So it there's tons of iconic moments to choose from, but for us to pick four each, for me it was kind of difficult. There's so many to choose from, but at the end of the day, it just shows how great of a race car driver he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to hit you with, as you mentioned, a couple honorable mentions because there are just so many crazy races for us to choose from here. Another Monaco win that was amazing was Monaco 2019, where the Mercedes team put him on I believe a hard set of tires with nearly 70 laps left in the race, and those tires were only rated to go 60 laps. He had Verstappen on better tires, nipping at his heels the entire race, trying to make dive bombs into corners. This is peak aggressive Verstappen era when he was not in a car that was strong enough to fight for championships.
Elbows out.
And yeah, exactly. Verstappen was full elbows out, and Hamilton essentially had to defend against one of the best passers and most aggressive passers in Formula One history for 60, 70 laps straight. So that's an iconic win. And then I think one that has to be mentioned, not necessarily because of the quality of the racing, but because of the significance, is Hungary 2013, when he started from pole and got his first ever win for the Mercedes team. Who knows if this is going to be his last win for Mercedes, and if that's, the front cover and back cover of this book of a career that Hamilton has put together with the Mercedes Formula One team. But that was the first chapter of that history. So I think it deserves notice as well.
Yeah, those are both great races. My only honorable mention that I'm gonna put out there is Japan 2007, and that's where they raced at the Fuji Speedway and not Suzuka, right? So it was also another really wet race, and that's when he was fighting Alonso, his teammate at that point. Alonso spins. He almost takes out Kubica at that time, and he ended up winning. And I think it was like the first race there in a decade or something like that, or more,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a track that nobody knows, and then at that point, it's an equalizer. If you have no practice there before, it just shows who can adapt to a new track the fastest. And like I said, it was in the wet. So it was, whenever it's in the wet, it makes it even a more significant victory, in my opinion, just because it's car control. It's car control 101, right? And I mean, the British might have some advantage at that point because it always rains in England, right? But it still shows how great he can be.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to cap off our draft section this week. It's going to cap off our discussion of this amazing victory. Final thought is that this was a legendary moment in Formula One history that we all just got to watch today. And I'm just thrilled that Hamilton was able to get this victory. I don't find myself every single race rooting for a Hamilton victory. I tend to root for different drivers in each race. But from the moment that he put P2 in qualifying, I was really hoping for that beautiful storybook ending of Hamilton getting the final victory with Mercedes here in Silverstone. And that's exactly what happened. So I couldn't be more thrilled about the fact that it happened for him and what this also means for the excitement of this Formula One season going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
So now we are going to be moving on to our off-track section.
Yeah. And this one is, we're going to be talking about Koenigsegg's new records, the world record that they just broke. Actually, well, two of them at the same time. The first one's 0 to 400 kilometers an hour back to zero. And the second one is 0 to 250 miles an hour back to zero. And I think 250 miles an hour is about 412-ish kilometers. So they did it pretty much in the same run because they're pretty close together. But the record for 0 to 400 to zero is now 27.38 seconds. That's I can't even. It's like rocket ship speeds. It's nuts. And it's a cool record because it just shows how fast and agile a car can be, not through a corner or anything, but how much speed it has, and also how fast it can bleed off that speed, which is really important for both a racetrack and brakes are really, you don't want to hit anything, right? So brakes are really important, and it also comes down to tire technology. The fact that they didn't have bespoke tires, they just did on Michelin, I think Cup 2Rs or something like that, but
Mm-hmm.
off the shelf tires, right? So, and they took the record from themselves. The previous record was held by the Regera, the Koenigsegg Regera, and this did it about a second faster, 0.98 seconds. And that car didn't have to change gears. It was one single gear. It's a hybrid, and this one is not. So I forgot to mention that the car that broke the record now is the Jesko Absolut. So the low downforce version, the top speed version, and not the attack, which is the track, the high downforce version. Yeah, tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, I think Koenigsegg is a brand that is on the forefront of automotive technology right now. Um, it's a company that is constantly looking to improve and break records, implement new technologies that haven't been thought up of in the car industry yet, and then applying those technologies in interesting and creative ways to make some of the best bespoke hypercars in the world. So I think that this victory, or rather this record, um, just goes to support the fact of what Koenigsegg is and the identity that they have as a brand, and goes to show that they're going to continue pushing these boundaries and these limits. There's been lots of interesting interviews with Christian von Koenigsegg where he talks about the fact that at a certain point, some of these limits you're talking about breaking the laws of physics almost to get past some of these records. And at a certain point, some of it gets a little bit ridiculous because who's going to be driving 0 to 400 and back to zero or whatever? But it's not about that. It's about the technology and the ability to do that and what that means for the rest of the car. If the car can go up to from 0 to 400 and then back to zero in just under 25 seconds, then think about what the car can do when you're driving on the highway and there's an accident in front of you and you slam on the brakes at 80 miles per hour, you're probably stopping on a dime. What does it mean for a car on the racetrack, which is obviously has higher downforce, but the stopping power of a car going into the corner without having to lock up the tires or lock up the brakes? What does it mean for the acceleration numbers for people who only care about, straight line speed and straight line acceleration? It really just is an example of the type of technology that Koenigsegg is developing and putting out there into the automotive world. And I hope that they continue trying to beat these records and put this technology out there, not because I particularly care what car goes 0 to 400 to zero, fastest, but because of what that means for the rest of the industry and what that means for the future of the cars that Christian van Koenigsegg is going to be creating.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to see a company trying to break these records and trying to be at the forefront of automotive technology. A lot of companies are, you know, just happy to be within the realms of possibility, let's say, because they're just trying to make money. So it to their customers, it doesn't really matter. They're not trying to break any records at this point, right? As long as it sounds good, looks good, has the brand prestige, they're going to sell out. But Koenigsegg doesn't have that brand prestige, and their brand prestige comes from what they can offer to the customers in terms of engineering solutions, right? So, yeah, they have a bunch of horsepower. It doesn't weigh that much. There's the recipe, the standard recipe for going fast and stopping fast or whatever. But like you said, some of this technology is ridiculous. Their 9 geared lightning speed transmission is two sets of 3 gears. 3 times 3 is 9, right? It's not 9 individual gears, right? There's six. So it's technology that no one's thought of, let's say. And on the car in itself, I think I mentioned it in a previous podcast, within the chassis built in is an air tank, and that's not an external air tank built in. It's literally the shape of the chassis has a hole in it to have air compressed to spin the turbos, right? These are things that nobody has thought of, and it brings it back to you know the the inception of the automobile. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, nobody knew what a car is supposed to be. There was no standardized controls. There was no, technology that's been proven. Everyone was just trying different things and seeing if it worked. And pretty much the customers were the test bed. And, you know, it, cars like the Koenigsegg Jesko and the Regera and stuff like that, these are cars where they have unproven technology, let's say, and then Koenigsegg proves that it can work. And you start thinking, why hasn't anyone else thought of this? Everyone's happy to be within, you know, what's been proven to work, what's, they're not trying to take any risks. They just, it's evolution and not revolution. And I think that Koenigsegg, their unique selling point, the USP, is revolutionary technology. And I love to see it personally. Not that I think I'll ever be able to afford it or drive one or even experience it, but the fact that someone is out there making brand new technologies, and this is supposed to be the end of the combustion era, right? And people are still coming out with crazy technology. Which leads me to our next topic within Koenigsegg, actually, and that is the fact that Koenigsegg is going to stop offering the tiny friendly giant engine, the 3-cylinder in the Gemera. So take us through that engine.
Yeah, so the tiny friendly giant is a really interesting piece of automotive technology, kind of along the same track that we're talking about right now. Something that other companies have not really tried, something that is done, with the intention of experimentation, and creating an engine that's super, super efficient. And that's what the tiny friendly giant was. It was a 3-cylinder engine with Koenigsegg's patented free valve technology, which was able to produce, I believe, nearly 700 horsepower off of just a 3-cylinder engine. It was offered in as an option for the Koenigsegg Gemera, which we had spoken about in a previous episode. It's like a family car hypercar if you're not familiar with it. Unfortunately, um, they were also offering the Yamera with a V8 option, which is great. We love V8s, and I think a lot of the customers just looked at the on paper side of things and said, okay, I can get a 3-cylinder engine or I can get a V8 engine. What do I want? And a lot of people picked the V8s. The 3-cylinders weren't cost effective enough for Koenigsegg to continue producing them in the Yamera. So they're not going to be producing any more of those. And I do think it's a shame. I hope that there's some automotive enthusiasts out there that own these 3-cylinder cars, because I think that 30 years down the line, when we look back at these cars, the 3-cylinder tiny friendly giant powered Gemeras are going to be the more sought after of the two, because how many cars can you get these days with a V8? It's like a dime a dozen, and you're not going to find this technology of the tiny friendly giant in other cars. Um, the way that Koenigsegg announced it was during an interview, and he did kind of tease a little bit that there may be other applications for the tiny friendly giant in future Koenigsegg cars, or some sort of an iteration of the engine. And I really hope that that's the case, because I know it's not as flashy as building a V16 like Bugatti, or, crazy V12s, or all these amazing high cylinder count engines that we love for combustion engines. But cool technology is cool technology, and I want to see this technology developed further. And if he's able to create 700, a little bit more than 700 horsepower off of 3 cylinders, I'd love to see how that could be packaged into even a smaller, lighter car. And you can create something that is super unique in this world of big, heavy cars that, take up a lot of space and have big wheelbases and such. I'd love to see him apply this to a future vehicle as well.
Yeah. My girlfriend has a Ford Ka with a little 1.2 liter 4-cylinder. If you had, this tiny friendly giant engine in a car with 870 kilos, it would fly.
Yeah.
But for anyone that doesn't know about free valve, it's a really cool new technology, and I believe it's probably one of the most significant advancements of the internal combustion engine in recent history, to be honest. And it essentially eliminates camshafts. So a camshaft, is pretty much timing for the valve, right? For the valve train. And it runs off a timing belt or a timing chain from the crank. So it's the camshaft is pretty much set, right? Valves open and close and the duration based off the shape of the lobes of a camshaft. And Honda has advanced that with VTEC, where you have a different cam profile to have different lift and duration for the valves. But then the free valve technology eliminates that, and what it is, it's a vacuum, a pneumatic vacuum with lines, right? Like air lines that run to the valves, and the vacuum pulls and pushes air that will lift or close the valves. And at that point, it's computer controlled, and you can lift it in different heights, and you can also keep it open or closed for longer. So you have variable valve timing that's infinite in its adjustability, and it's VTEC like crazy. you Most variable valve timing is limited to timing, not lift. So it's duration and not lift of the valves. But this will do both in any capacity that you want. If you look at like a timing graph of a valve, it's a sine wave. It's like this. But for the free valve technology, it could be a line like this, because you can open and close instantly, and there's no timing or overlap, or you can change the timing however you want. You can make the intake and the exhaust valves overlap or close whenever you want, based on whether you want fuel economy, whether you want absolute power, or if you just want to be, just cruising along the highway and have it be smooth, right? So, and it really advances the internal combustion engine in all four fronts. The only reason why it's not implemented in every car right now is two reasons, actually. One is cost. It's a lot more expensive. There's over 100 years of, tried and true technology with camshafts. But number two is that they couldn't make it quiet enough in the beginning for a passenger vehicle, right? So, but then that's been advanced as well. And Koenigsegg has partnered with a Chinese company. I want to say it's Geely. It could be Geely or Chery. I don't remember
Mhm.
which. Most likely Geely, I think, because they own Volvo. And they implemented in that, and so far it works. So, they patent it, so they own it, and it's probably expensive to license it for other companies. But the fact that they are able to make a technology like this gives the internal combustion engine hope for the future, right? And if we can make it clean, if we can make it fuel efficient, then we can continue it on, and it doesn't have to die off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the important key to it is it's this technology is applicable to performance engines because you're able to get raw performance out of an engine. But from a business perspective and a survivability of the internal combustion engine, the key is being able to use the free valve technology to tune for fuel efficiency and greatly expand the efficiency of internal combustion engines to a point of full adjustability where you can have drive modes that are now pushing to 50, 60, 70 miles per gallon rather than just, in that 30 to 40 mile per gallon range that most typical engines that are the more efficient engines these days have kind of sat in. So, as you mentioned, this is a technology that is at the forefront, and this is exactly why I do hope that a super efficient three-cylinder engine like the Tiny Friendly Giant is used in another car in the future, so that we can see that technology progress and move forward and see how it can be used.
I would like to see it like the new LS, just swap it into everything.
Yeah, I want my Tiny Friendly Giant Miata.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
Lotus with one. That would be cool.
Um, all right. Well, I think that is going to round out our episode this week. We obviously covered quite a bit, especially in the on track section, talking about that Lewis Hamilton victory. In off track, talking about the recent technological advances from Koenigsegg. If you guys have any comments related to the retirement of, or the temporary retirement of the Tiny Friendly Giant, about this insane record set by the Koenigsegg Jesko Absolut, or about Lewis Hamilton getting back onto the top step of the podium, please let us know in the comments. Reach out to us on social media. We're out there on Instagram, on X, on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the platforms. And we really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we'll look forward to covering some more stuff next week.
Yeah, and actually next week we have a car designer coming onto our podcast, so that should be really interesting. I look forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a really fascinating conversation, and I can't wait to see what that brings. So, thank you all for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, ciao guys, bye.